approaching Glasgow. The M8 route to Fort William via Dumbarton to Loch Lomond, through Tindrum to Glencoe Mountain Resort, via Loch Leven to Loch Linney, and finally Fort William. Loch Tulla. Glencoe Mountain. The rebuilt King's House Hotel. The most photographed mountain in Scotland. Bridge over Loch Leven. Loch Linney, at the end of which lies Fort William. The formation of Scotland began about 650 million years ago. Scotland was part of an earth plate with North America and Greenland, but migrated east while North America and Greenland drifted in the other direction. About 350 million years ago, Scotland met England, although not every Scotsman is sure whether this was a good encounter. It is not surprising that Scotland is home to rocks whose chemical composition originates from the Appalachian region of North America. So you can say there are places where you are geologically on two continents at the same time, although these are 4,500 kilometers separated from each other. Scotland was formed from 5 individual fault zones which collided with the Baltic continental plate, on which England and Wales are located, and joined to form a relatively stable landmass. The first fault zone extends from Ballantrae in the west to Dunbar in the east, in an almost straight line. The second fault zone runs over the Isle of Arran to Helensburgh, Loch Lomond with its islands along the Grampian Mountains, which are also the clear separation from the highlands and the lowlands, to Stonehaven. The third fault line is the Great Glen, which roughly stretches from Fort William to Inverness. Yes, it even continues to the Shetlands. The fourth runs north of the Isle of Mull and hits roughly at Dorney on land, then continues along a very rough line to Pola. The fifth and last fault follows the eastern coastline of the Outer Hebrides. We begin our flight over the Great Glen about the height of Fort William. To the right of the valley are the Grampian Mountains, which lie between the second and the third fault. Here are also the two highest mountains of Scotland, Ben Nevis near Fort William and Ben Macdui, a little on the halfway from Fort William to Aberdeen in the mountain range Cairngorms. To the left are the Northwest Highlands. From Fort William we go over the Caledonian Canal to Loch Lochy. Which is connected to Loch Oich by a canal. The watershed lies between Loch Lochy and Loch Oich. Loch Oich flows over the Caledonian Canal and the River Oich into Loch Ness at Fort Augustus. At Loch Ness there are some important places for tourism, like Fort Augustus, Invermorriston and Drumnadrochid with Urquhart Castle. The plates of the Great Glen moved from the middle Carboniferous to the early Tertiary and shifted about 130 kilometers. The Great Glen fault, as seen today, was formed by glacial erosion. Along the Great Glen Way you can discover interesting rock formations as a testimony of the origin of the Great Glen. Loch Ness flows into the North Sea via the Caledonian Canal and the River Ness. Both flow through Inverness in different routes. May 11th, 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm starting from the hostel through Fort William to the actual start of the Great Glen Way at the ruins of the old fort of Fort William. There's not much left of the fort that gave Fort William its today name. The fortification played an important role to dominate the Highlands. General George Monk, the commander-in-chief of Oliver Cromwell's army in Scotland during the Civil War, built Fort Inverlochy in 1656. The location at Loch Linnhe was well chosen because it enabled unhindered supplies from the sea, and troops could quickly be sent from here to the troubled regions of the Highlands. In 1690, General Hugh Mackay of Skourie commanded King William's troops in Scotland. He tore down the wooden fort of Monk and rebuilt it with solid stone walls. Now his name was Fort William. Here the inglorious massacre of Glencoe in 1692 was planned. General Wade reinforced the fortification once again in 1725. In 1746, the Jacobite army of Bonnie Prince Charlie besieged the fort, but not very successfully, because the fort could be supplied over the sea. The fort was maintained until the 18th century, when the crew was kept on their toes by local smugglers. In 1889, the West Highland Railway bought the fort and built a railway station here. And here it is, where it all begins or ends, 120 kilometers on the Great Glen Way. At the beginning it goes through an industrial area. Ben Nevis watches over Fort William. To my right is Inverlochy. On the left is an arm of Loch Linnhe. Fern, as it is often found here. The adult fern can reach an impressive size. Bluebells. View of Glen and Ben Nevis. The duty of every hiker to open and close gates. A few locals grazing and loitering. Soldiers' Bridge. Behind the railway bridge are the remains of Inverlochy Castle. The bridge crosses the river Lochy, which flows into Loch Linnhe. On the beach at Coal. Across the water is Fort William. At the end of the bay, the Caledonian Canal flows into Loch Linnhe. The pride of the Royal Navy lying on the beach, or is it a Russian spy cutter? An overflow of the canal that drains into the sea. The rising smoke comes from the historic steam train the Jacobite, which runs from Fort William to Mallock. Here he stopped at Corpach. The Corpach double lock serves to maintain the water level of the Caledonian Canal at low tide. The overflow this time in the other direction. Upsetting the cat, that's fine. The Bannerwee Swingbridge, one of many swing bridges that allow traffic to switch from one side to the other in the Great Glen. Behind the bridge is a complex of 8 locks called Neptune's Staircase. In about 90 minutes, ships cover a height difference of 20 meters. Since drone overflights over locks are not always popular, here is a picture from Wikipedia to illustrate the size of the lock. The mooring in front of the lock. The banks of the canal are lined with various wildflowers, yellow gorse and various shrubs. On the left the canal, in the middle the dam, which creates a clear separation to the river Lochie. View from the dam down to the river Lochie. The canal is crossed by a road at the Old Sheangane. Such underpasses are quite common on this section. The 120-kilometer long Great Glen Way was opened in 2002, and since then it has been continuously extended or changed in its route. The Great Glen Way was supported by the EU in all its parts as a hiking, cycling and canoeing trail. Moy Bridge. Here you have the possibility to camp wild. There is also a self-composting toilet. There are several along the Great Glen Way, but these can be locked. More information can be found in a separate video. The camping Gairlochie Holiday Park and my station for the night. Neighbors from Berlin. 8 o'clock. The tent's still a little frosted. It was probably cooler than the weather forecast said. Departure and a bright blue sky. The road back to Gairlochie. River Lochie to the left. Behind the trees is the loch and the bridge of Gairlochie. The old cemetery of Gairlochie. The loch of Gairlochie. Here you can camp wild. There is also a toilet and a shower. After sections with little frequented roads, I walk through little sections of beautiful forest. Moss, heather and a small pine peacefully united. Old tree population next to new plantations. Unfortunately, you can see it in the Great Glen again and again, that forests fall victim to a clear cut. The passage through the forest is only short. A newly laid stretch of road down to Loch Lochie. The old way had to give way to the building ground. Wrecks of old ships can be found on the shores of the lake. In this area of Loch Lochy, camping and making fire is forbidden. Loch Lochy is the first lake to pass while hiking the Great Glen from Fort William. The lake is about 16 km long, at its widest point about 2 km wide and up to 162 meter deep. Lizzie is said to live in the lake, a 12-meter long monster like Nessie. From above you can see a fish farm on the other side of the lake. In the distance you can see the northern end of Loch Lochy. The bay, which is also the widest point. On the right at the southern end the Caledonian Canal, and on the left the Mucomere Cut, which feeds a hydroelectric power station and then flows into the River Lochy. As in many other places in Scotland, rival clans close to Loch Lochy had to fight each other. The clans of the MacDonald and Cameron fought with the clan of the Frasers for the leadership of the clan MacDonald. So in July 1544 it came to a fight, which the Frasers lost. Not far from here is the Clan Cameron Museum. A big oak tree right by the lake. The numerous tree species on a small area are impressive. The Royal Commandos were trained in the Great Glen during the Second World War. Numerous places remind you about their history, like this place where the disembarking of landing craft was practiced. On the ground you can see the shape of such a boat. The road to the Clan Cameron Museum. The River Archaig, fed from Loch Archaig, is a feeder of Loch Lochy. On the wayside, meadows full with bluebells. The route so close to the shore makes the section exceptionally exciting. One of the numerous brooks on whose edges ferns grow. On the left, a small rhododendron, which is regarded as an invasive species in Scotland and the whole kingdom. Good to see how steep the sides of the valley rise, and it makes clear that during the Ice Age the Great Glen Glacier pushed through here. One of the clear cuts of the Scottish forest owners. Another self-composting toilet. Here a path leads to a wild camping site near the water. The northern end of Loch Lochy is near. On the left the tree stands out on a slope. At a closer look you can see swifts starting from their breeding caves. Yellow gorse. The scent is very intense, especially when you pass such an accumulation. The section from Gair Lochy to South Lagan is quite exhausting for your feet, as you have to walk a lot on paved roads and gravel. The passages with forest soil are a real recreation. Lagan Locks. Directly by the lock is the restaurant The Eagle Bark. As you can see, the Caledonian Canal is higher than the lowest point in the valley. The canal forms the watershed in the Great Glen. on the way to the Great Glen Hostel. Finally, the goal of today has been reached. Excursion to Invergary. The third day was meant as a kind of a rest day. From the hostel I walk along the canal to the lagan Swingbridge. I walk on the Great Glen Way to the left of Loch Ness. It leads through the forest with a view of the lake. The left route around Loch Ness to Fort Augustus is partly closed until September 2019 due to forest clearing. Trip to the local memorial site for the victims of the First and Second World War. Opposite an old servant house at the entrance to Glengarry Castle. The bridge over the River Garry. Glengarry Castle is today a hotel for the somewhat thicker purse. Before 1960 it was called Invergary House and belonged to the clan MacDonald of Glengarry, a branch of the clan MacDonald. The present hotel and other properties were transferred to the National Trust for Scotland in 1960. Invergary Castle was the seat of the clan chief of the MacDonalds of Glengarry. The castle was an L-shaped tower house with a round tower. The main building had 5 floors and the tower 6. The floor area was about 16.7 to 9.7 meters. The building was secured all around with arrow slits. The castle has an eventful history and was often besieged, damaged and rebuilt until the Jacobite uprising in 1745. Here it was to be blown up, but the walls did not want to give way, and so the ruin has survived to this day. Sneaking the loot from a nearby gas station shop. Next to Invergary Castle is a small jetty with a meadow and seating on the shore of Loch Ness. The meadow is full of wildflowers. The way back to Lagan via the A82. Unfortunately, it always runs along the busy road. A small stream on the last meters into Loch Ness. Dried up fern of the previous year lets us guess how big the young shots become. Departure from the Great Glen Hostel. I hike along the Caledonian Canal to Loch Ness. The canal was built from 1803 to 1822 by Thomas Telford. 2/3 of the canal is covered by natural waters. During the Highland clearance period, new jobs were created and more were to follow. In the course of the Industrial Revolution, a rural exodus took place, which was also used by numerous landowners to get rid of the small sheep farms, so that sheep breeding could be carried out on a large scale. The hope for economic success of the canal did not materialize. Today the canal is used for tourism. The Swingbridge near Lagan. Old Man's Beard. Invergary Rail Station. Since 2016, there are plans to rebuild the line as a kind of a railway museum. An information board at Invergary Station shows the plans for the station and the historic route. A few meters of track are already along the station. There is also a lonely locomotive on it. In 1903, a line coming from Swingbridge with a stop in Invergary continued to Fort Augustus. The line should also connect other remote villages in the Great Glen. It was no economical success, as there were hardly any goods or passengers to ship. But railroad companies disputed heavily about the construction through the Great Glen to Inverness. Operation of the line was stopped in 1933 and dismantled in 1946. The way to Fort Augustus leads me right past Loch Oich on the old railway embankment, which is now part of the Great Glen Way. The left route via Invergary is longer and closed until September 2019 due to logging. Loch Oich is the highest point in the Great Glen, and the river Oich flows into Loch Ness. Loch Oich is about 6 km long, 460 meter wide and 47 meter deep at its deepest point. Many small streams feed the lake to the left and right of the valley walls. Again and again you hike through the breakthroughs which were made for the railway. Natural lake shore. On the other side, a piece of Invergary Castle rises above the treetops. The rhododendron, unloved by the Scottish forestry. At various points along the route you can leave the railway path and walk a few meters further down the lake shore. You walk through a natural forest with birches, marsh grasses and a lot of moss. This part of the trail is very pleasant to walk. The red and green buoys show ships the safe passage over the lake. Invergary Castle with a wreck and jetty. In Loch Oich there are also a few small islands. A wild camping area with a toilet. This building could be a nice bothy in the future. Loch Oich from above. In the distance another bridge over the canal. Steaming ahead and passing a tunnel. Nearing the end of Loch Oich. The bridges over canal and river. The Swingbridge from the other side. To the left of the power line you can see the old steel bridge over the river Oich. Again you can see that the land is lower than the water level in the canal. An overflow to the river Oich. Colochi Loch, a fast flyover. The lock keeper didn't mind, because there was no ship in the lock. Nice to see the difference of the water level. Five to 7 minutes and the ship can go on. Moorings for the waiting boats if there is another ship in transit. The path is very varied, a small compensation for the hard underground on the path. Don't we know that little boat? On the left the canal and on the right the River Oich, separated by the dam in the middle. You can see that the water level in the canal is higher. The meandering River Oich was divided by the dam, so one bank is straight and the other follows the old bank line. In the middle of the picture, Cutra Loch, another loch to lower the canal a few meters before reaching the 5-step loch staircase in Fort Augustus. The Cutra Loch is beautifully situated in a small forest. The canal is lowered by about 3 meters. Note the speed limit also applies to hikers. The Wild River Oich. Here the canal is man-made. Nature does not provide such straight shorelines. First houses of Fort Augustus. The highest lock chamber of Fort Augustus. The ships prepare for the change into the next chamber. Descent to Loch Ness along the 5-chamber lock staircase. I'm standing on the busy Swingbridge overlooking Loch Ness. The castle-like walls are the Highland Club, a modest 4-star establishment habitable for a cheap £450 per night. The fast ferry coming from Inverness. Loch Ness, you can see it's a tourist magnet. No wonder that Nessie makes herself scars. The old impassable bridge over the River Oich. Morag's Lodge, my place for the night, located only 20 meters from the Great Glen Way. After leaving Fort Augustus, the trail leads through a beautiful forest to the high route of the Great Glen Way. Unfortunately, it doesn't go on so comfortable. On the left it goes to the high route, to the right to the low route. I continue through the mixed forest to the high route. The average altitude level of the high route has been reached. On the right, typical landscape of the highlands. Left along the banks of Loch Ness, forest. Behind me Fort Augustus and the Caledonian Canal. In the distance, slightly in the haze, Ben Nevis. Cotton grass, a typical inhabitant of the highlands, and its boggy soils. The sometimes steep slopes along Loch Ness are remnants of the Ice Age, even if parts have already been abraded by erosion. You have to reckon with these loud birds. Parts of Loch Ness belong to a low-flying area. Quite often you can see layered rocks along the way. The layers are not always horizontal. Loch Ness is the second largest lake in Scotland after Loch Lomond. Loch Ness is 37 km long, about 1.5 km wide and 230 meters deep at its deepest point. What today is filled with sweet water was a bay about 12,000 years ago, as after the melting of the ice masses the land rose and Loch Ness reached about 16 meters above sea level. Here so you can see the steep slopes along Loch Ness. These round walls are benches that provide some protection for the hiker when there is too much wind. Interesting deposits in the rock. For geologists, the Great Glen is an El Dorado. Again and again you come across small streams with fresh water. Nessie? Is she blinking at me? A single tree. Was it forgotten at the last clear cut? The trees here grow very protected in the canyon. A Scottish Stornamandel. The descent to Invermoriston begins, the Bay of Invermoriston. The in-water flag is the visible sign of the river Moriston flowing into Loch Ness. In front of me the valley of Inverness. On the other side you can see a clear-cut area I have to pass later today. The long way to Inverness. We see the village right in front of us. Not a long way to go. Wrong. A typical new planting after a clear cut. River Moriston, one way and the other way. The scenic bridge is privately owned but open to the public. The coolest dog lives in Inverness. Climb to the second part on the way to All Sai. By Scottish standards, it is hot and very humid. The trees still give some shade. Clear cuts like this are endangering the last predator in Scotland, the Scottish tiger, a wildcat only living in forests. On the way to the high route to All Sai. Vertically erected rock, as it only happens when it collides with another earth plate. I change to the low route. Staying on the high route, you walk through typical Highland terrain. The view to Loch Ness is blocked by a hill. On the low route overlooking Loch Ness, and how the broom smells. The green tunnel of the low route. Rhododendron next to broom. All Sai, with the Loch Side Hostel, in the garden of the hostel, direct at the shore of Loch Ness. From All Sai, it takes a long climb back to the high route. The old Syke has exposed vertically erected rock. It is interesting to note that the rock was erected facing away from Loch Ness. After a hike of about 20 minutes you can see a horizontal stratification. It must have been quite turbulent here 350 million years ago. On the high route you pass Troll's Bridge. A primary school class contributed some pictures and poems of trolls on the occasion of the opening of the bridge. The bridge crosses the Old Syke. almost at the highest point of the stretch. A sheltered lookout with a beautiful view over Loch Ness and the Highlands. Unfortunately, the view of the high route is not always as beautiful as here. You should decide if you want to take the ascent in the longer way from all sides. As on the low route, one often walks through the green tunnel. Descend to another great panoramic viewpoint on the high route. The pine trees along the way give the air a pleasant smell. The Lochside Hostel is located on a small promontory with an outstanding group of trees. On this part of the high route the view is sensational, partly due to an old clear cut. The alternation of clear-cut areas and regrown commercial forest is always extreme in Scotland. Here high and low route meet again. In the hamlet of Groat Tyke there is a small pottery with a cafe, which I unfortunately passed by because I missed the sign. Trail magic on the Great Glen Way. This part of the route is a bit difficult. You can walk on the road or on the not yet finished footpath. I'm curious what kind of surface it gets. Then again, road and the locals speed past you. Always a beautiful sight and sand. The Great Glen Way leads for approximately 5 kilometers over this narrow road. Unfortunately, not every driver takes his foot off the gas when hikers are on the road. With that much sunshine, you can enjoy every bit of shade. First houses of Drumna Drochid. The river Coilty, Drumna Drochid has about 1,100 inhabitants and is a classic tourist place. Beside the Nessie Centre there is the castle ruin of Urquhart Castle, and in August the Highland Games are held, to which also the Queen can be seen. Accordingly, there is a lot of car, truck and bus traffic. My campsite for the night. Ballum Farm Camping. Later I will walk over the other side of the forest to reach my destination, the Abriachan Eco Campsite. The thundering birds of the US Air Force. Urquhart Castle. Around 1230, King Alexander II had suppressed a revolt against his rule in the Moray region. To secure his dominion, he handed this region over to his son-in-law, Alan Durward. He began with the construction of a strategically located castle, which was a fortress. However, the complex was to have all the conveniences of a residence that a chief of the clan Urquhart expected. This castle was one of the largest in Scotland in its heyday. The stone ring wall surrounded an extensive area and protected the interior wooden residential buildings. In 1275, Alan Durward died without heir, and the castle fell to the Comyn family. It was conquered by the English in 1296 and returned to the Scots in 1303, but fell back into English hands in the same year. In 1306, after Robert the Bruce had become king, the site finally came under Scottish rule. After that, the fortress gained strategic importance and was further developed into a fortress in 1395. Thus the strongly fortified gatehouse and the keep were added as a second defensive point in the north of the fortress. Over the next 150 years, many of the buildings were severely damaged when the lords of the Isles of Clan MacDonald stood against the crown. From 1545, the castle was abandoned in large parts as a defensive structure. Instead, the keep was renovated and converted into a residential building for a laird. At this time, part of the defenses had already fallen into disrepair. Around 1600, the castle was abandoned as the lairds preferred more pleasant residences in better areas. As a result, the castle no longer played a strategic role. The last garrison left the site in 1692 after the Scottish Jacobite uprising of 1689. Since then, the castle has been abandoned to decay. The buildings were systematically plundered, stones and roofs were partially demolished for the construction of new houses. On the way to the castle you pass a siege machine, a trebuchet. The trebuchet is a subspecies of the catapult. Unlike a catapult, a trebuchet does not use tension from ropes or wood to shoot the projectile, which is usually a hewn, round, solid stone. A container weighted with stones accelerates the throwing device by gravity. The weight of the projectiles can be between 10 and 120 kg and could reach up to 300 meters. The drawbridge and the gatehouse with the guards. In front of us, the small gatehouse with its additional rooms, and behind it, the tower house with its viewing platforms. Tower house. This was the Lord's private chambers. At the highest point of tower house, the servants had the best view. The gatehouse to the right, and to the left, the big hall. The water gate to Loch Ness. The castle could be supplied by this gate, if necessary, when it was besieged from the land side. There were certainly no stairs that beautiful at that time. After leaving the campsite, the Great Glen Way leads 4 kilometers along the A82 until I reach nature again. The Loch Ness Center. This is about the Loch Ness and, of course, Nessie. Finally, the Great Glen Way is leaving the A82. You can look forward to the silence of the forest. A few free areas allow a view of Loch Ness and Urquhart Castle. A beautiful forest path, but with steep gradients that stretch over 2 kilometers. Wild waters must be crossed. Canadian lumberjacks harvested trees in this forest during the Second World War. Obstacles were made from these trees to make it more difficult for the Germans to land on the coasts of Great Britain. The gravel road is anything but pleasant to walk on. At the structure of the rock formation, you can see beautifully how earth plates were folded or erected. Another sin of Scottish forestry. This area has to be crossed by the Great Glen Way. Not necessarily a typical Highland landscape, but a lot of heath interspersed with a few boulders and single trees. The devastation of a clear cut. The reforestation is done, but the damage to the soil is immense. From here it is about 2.5 kilometers to the eco-camping site. The gravel path is anything but comfortable to walk on. Loch Lade. Behind is Abreachan. the last meters to finish the stretch. The eco camping site is more of a supervised wild camping. But with really good food. Escape. At 4 o'clock it stopped raining. The first rain since I'm on the Great Glen Way. The Oracle of Meteosat gives me a rain-free window until 10 o'clock. At that time I want to be in Inverness. Very Highlandish, the surrounding area. With the clouds, everything wet, yes, real Highland feeling. Only the midges are missing. But until now I didn't have any. I've got 3 miles of road ahead of me. The poor animal is totally confused because of the rain after days of drought. After the road, as usual, there is a gravel road. There are plenty of pheasants along the way. A really nice forest. And a ranger camp right next to the path. Quite nice place for a wild camp. On the right in the forest I saw another ranger camp. A nameless loch just before I come to the first houses of Inverness. A still, stiff toad. Hopefully no one will tap on it. A signpost full with shit of seagulls. Up to the first houses I often walk through broom fields which smell incredibly good. The Great Glen Way leads across this path through this residential area. Finally back at the Caledonian Canal. The open Swingbridge lets ship pass and closes again. After I've walked through an industrial park, I hit the River Ness. The white suspension bridges are typical. It starts to rain. My rain-free window begins to close. On time before it really started to pour down, I arrived at the hostel. After I had a shower and stowed away my things, I strolled through Inverness. The town hall of Inverness. It's really pouring. Scotland finally shows its Scottish side. And here it is, where everything ends or begins, the 120 kilometers of the Great Glen Way. Inverness Castle. Day of travel to Glasgow. Wellington with 2 pylons. Is that his Brexit protest? Conclusion. The Great Glen Way was even more scenic for me than the West Highland Way. There are enough accommodations along the way, whether campgrounds, hostels, B&Bs or hotels. There are also plenty of wild camp possibilities, but you should pay attention to the prohibited areas, which are not always easy to spot, especially around Loch Lochy. The possibilities to buy food between Fort William and Fort Augustus are very poor. Therefore you should take food with you for 2 to 3 days. Drinks or water are always available. Also in Fort Augustus, the offer to resupply food is not exactly overwhelming. But you can make it to Drumnadrochit with the offered things. In Drumnadrochit you will find an old supermarket, a grocery store and a brand new co-op. It's really the kicker. It would have been nice if this co-op was in Fort Augustus. Between Drumnadrochit and Inverness it becomes gloomy concerning supplies and accommodations. The eco-camping site is only a camping site by name and really very eco. You can call it a wild camp. There will be an extra video for accommodation and food. The paths of the Great Glen Way consist mainly of gravel roads, partly comparable to the old military roads on the West Highland Way. Especially the passages where rough gravel lies are really bad to walk. You also often walk on asphalted roads, which causes offended feet after 16 to 17 kilometers, despite well-cushioned footwear. Natural forest paths, as they are known from Central Europe, are unfortunately very rare. What is really nice, there is a lot of history on the Great Glen Way. Castles, museums, the sites of the Royal Commandos from World War II, or the tourist areas like Fort Augustus and Drumnadrochit, where everything seems to resolve around Loch Ness and Nessie. During the stopover next to the runway, Concorde. And a special salute to our English friends.